So my Malaysian subscriber wants to know, where do you feel more safe, Malaysia or the US? That's a pretty easy question to answer, and I'll tell you why. Hey everybody, welcome to another video and good morning from Washington. It's a rainy day today and I'm hanging out in my hut that I built in the forest out of scraps. You may have seen it in my last video, but today I was going to answer your guys' questions about coronavirus, Malaysia, the US, how are they dealing with it, how do they compare, so I hope you guys enjoy. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel by clicking the link below. It only takes a second and helps me out a lot. Go ahead and click it. I'll wait for you. I've got a lot of comments on my recent videos saying that Oregon's so beautiful, Washington's so beautiful, the US is beautiful, we'd like to see more. So while I'm answering questions, I'm going to show you some clips from some of my YouTube videos here in the US, some of my favorite places, so I hope you guys enjoy. Alright, so first question. So Alarming has a few questions. What do you think about gap mentality about coronavirus between young generation compared to old generation in the US? To be honest, I can't really tell a difference between the younger generation and the older generation. A lot of younger people that I know, they're being very cautious and they're staying home, but also a lot of them are still going out and going jogging and going fishing and doing a lot of outdoor activities. There's a lot of the older generation that I've talked to that are kind of maybe kind of stubborn and kind of stuck in their ways, and they don't really care about the virus. They're going to go out and do their thing anyway. Also, there's a lot of old people that I know as well that they're in their older years and they're afraid of catching the virus. Maybe they live in like a higher risk area, so they don't want to catch it and get sick and possibly not recover from it. So I haven't really noticed a difference between the older and the younger generation. It's more kind of a regional thing, depending on how many corona cases there are in their area, if they live in a big city, if they live in a small farm town in the middle of rural America. It's kind of more a geographical kind of thing. So Isabel has asked, what's the latest update on coronavirus in the US? Is it getting any better? Any new action taken by the government? At the moment when I'm making this video, there are 1,113,437 cases in the US, and 135,000 have recovered, and 64,000 deaths. So that's pretty terrible. So I would say the situation in the US is not great, although we do have a big population in the US, so there's that to consider. But still, the US has a lot more cases than other countries that have higher population than the US. Is it getting better in the US? The curve has flattened a bit here in the US. It was increasing rapidly there for a while, and it has kind of leveled off. It kind of goes up and down here and there. But it's not going down exactly yet. It's kind of staying steady, which is a good thing. So yes, it is getting better in that aspect, but it's not decreasing yet. Any new action taken by the government? A lot of the news that I've been seeing recently have been talk of reopening everything. Even though the cases aren't actually decreasing, it's just leveled off. They are talking about opening up businesses in certain areas. There's a lot of states where the citizens are protesting, states that have like a rural population, small towns, and they're not really worried about the spread of the virus that much, where they don't have that many cases. So they're talking about getting the economy going again. So that's what I've heard recently. So my friend Sadru asked, do the US government handle the virus very seriously? That's hard to say. I think the federal government is handling it pretty seriously. They are putting restrictions on the entire US, but each state has their own rules and manages themselves, so it's really up to the states if they want to follow those rules or not. Some states are very strict about it, and they have fines and putting people in jail. There are states that are resisting the federal government, and they're opening themselves up and continuing life as normal. And Sadru also asks, and why right now many US citizens suddenly going outside like a normal day than before? Probably referring to the video that I made in Portland, Oregon, where I drove downtown and I showed you guys a park where everybody was out playing. Everybody was with their kids, they were with their dogs, they were playing frisbee, which you can watch by clicking the link right here. So to answer the question, there are a lot of areas in the US that are locked down. like New York for instance. But here in Oregon, at least where I'm at, there's not as many cases. In my quarantine video that I made, I think there was about 1,100 cases in Oregon at that time, and now there's about 2,000 cases. Still, that's relatively a small number, so a lot of people aren't that scared of it, especially a lot of younger people. They aren't really afraid of the virus. So I guess the mentality would be, I guess there's not a lot of cases where I'm at, so I'll probably be safe. But that's kind of dangerous thinking, because if everybody has that mentality, then there's nothing gonna be stopping the virus if everybody's going out and everybody's thinking, well, I'm not gonna get sick. Another one of my good friends, For You to See, asked me, should you think America to start strict MCO all over state like Malaysia? That's a tough question. I think that it does need to be stricter. Like Malaysia, I did like the way that Malaysia was doing it. I was very impressed by how the Malaysian government was handling the situation and how everybody was staying home, or most people were staying home at least. So I came from Malaysia where it was very strict, back to the US where I didn't really see them controlling it at all, except for a few stores that were closed here and there. So I don't think that a movement control order like in Malaysia would work in the US, because the US is so big. So I'm from Oregon, and Oregon is almost the same size as Malaysia. And that's just one of the states. There's 50 states in the US, so it's a huge place. Each state has their own rules and laws, so it'd be very hard to manage, and it's very difficult to actually enforce an MCO like they are doing in Malaysia. We do have city police and state police and federal police in the US, as well as the US military, but I think with all of them working non-stop, I don't think it would be possible to manage an MCO here in the US. But I think that it does need to be strict, especially in the hot spots. I've heard that New York is pretty strict, but there's also a lot of cases in Seattle, and from what I've heard from my friends in Seattle, it's not that bad. They're going out every day, and they're going jogging and walking, and it's like life is normal. So here's a personal question, which is fine. Sunan asked, what do you do for a living and how it affects you during this unprecedented time? So I don't actually have a job right now. If you go to my About page on my YouTube channel, or if you read in the comments section that I post on every video, I explain a little bit of my background, where I worked for several years in a certain industry, and I saved all my money for years just to travel, and I quit my job, and now I've been traveling. I lived in China for 1 year where I practiced martial arts at a Buddhist temple, and since then I've been traveling. I was in Taiwan and Philippines and Nepal, where I went to Mount Everest. I was in India for several months, and then I arrived in Kuala Lumpur the day before the MCO began, so I didn't really get to see Malaysia, so I thought it'd be best to come back and stay with my family in the US during this crisis until it's over, and once this crisis is over, I'll be traveling again, and I'll be coming back to Kuala Lumpur and Malaysia for sure. So to answer Zunan's question more directly, what am I doing for a living? I'm living my dream, I'm traveling, I'm working on my dream to become a travel vlogger. And how does that affect me at the moment? I'm stuck at home, so I can't travel right now. And if I was abroad, traveling somewhere, I would be stuck in a hotel like I was in Kuala Lumpur. So it has affected me quite a bit. So Ermship Pilot asked, with so many people being infected and so many deaths in New York, one would think that a lockdown should have been enforced. However, either the New York's governor or mayor, I can't remember, recently said that a lockdown is un-American. Do you agree with that? So yes, I do believe that a lockdown would be un-American, but I don't agree that that's the way it should be. I do believe it's un-American because here in the US we take our freedoms and our liberties very seriously. It's one of the most important things to us. Many Americans are very grateful for our forefathers because they fought and died for us during the American Revolutionary War against the British, the American Civil War against slavery, and a lot of other wars. So freedom and liberty are very important in the US, and a lockdown takes those freedoms and liberties away. So a lot of people are very suspicious when it comes to their rights and the US government. They feel that they may not get their rights back. So I do agree that it's un-American, but that's not how I think it should be. I think that there should be a lockdown. Since I saw how they did things in Malaysia, and I've been following the Malaysian news ever since I got back to the US, I think that the virus is going to be eliminated in Malaysia much quicker than it will be in the US. I've heard that some of the restrictions for the MCO are going to be lifted on Monday, which is great. As long as Malaysia is keeping its border closed and not letting people in and out constantly, I think Malaysia is going to be fine. But I think here in the US, it's going to drag on for months and months. So Mammoth Mew asks, what does American government help give people during the situation to people staying at home? So the US government helps out some homeless people, helps out people that are on lower incomes, that are on welfare. But as far as normal, everyday Americans, the most recent thing that I can think of is the stimulus package, which is a one-time payment of about $1,200 US. And that's to help for people that are out of work or if they're struggling to pay their bills. But not everybody's getting the stimulus package. There's a lot of rules about it, but I think like a lot of the richer people aren't getting it. But they are giving it to a lot of people. Jay wants to know if the US government gives any help in terms of food to those in need. So the only actual help that I know about from the government is just the normal welfare, the money that poor and lower income people and families get from the government, which is what they get all year round, but maybe they get a little extra during these times. I'm not sure exactly. There's a lot of nonprofit organizations and food banks around the US that operate all year long, whether there's a virus or not, and they take donations for food. They have volunteers that help serve the food and prepare the food. One of the bigger, more organized ones is called Feeding America, and they've had a huge ad campaign going during this pandemic, trying to get donations for extra food for the homeless. So a lot of the poor and needy are getting some help. So IZZXTS, I don't know how to pronounce that, but their question is, can you do reaction between Malaysia case and recover and US case and recover? I'm assuming you're talking about just the recovery rates between Malaysia and the US. At the time of making this, Malaysia has about 6,000 coronavirus cases and over 4,000 have recovered. So Malaysia's doing pretty well. That's 2/3, that's about 66-67% have recovered so far. That's a lot better than a lot of countries around the world. At the moment, the US has over 1.1 million confirmed coronavirus cases and only 135,000 have recovered. So that's a little over 10%. That's 10, 11, 12%, I would say. So 66-67% in Malaysia versus 12% in the US. I'm curious why that is. I know the healthcare in the US is pretty good. The hospitals are pretty good. I know the hospitals and healthcare in Malaysia are amazing, but that's really strange that it's so low in the US. JK asked, do you think that the pandemic will reduce in US while their citizens don't take this seriously? So probably not. If people don't take it seriously and they're not socially distancing, they're just going to continue to spread the disease around and it's going to linger on for months, years, who knows. So if everybody starts following the rules that the government advises, that the entire world advises, then eventually, yes, it will get better. But I do think that it'll take a while here in the US for that to happen. So Hafiza has asked, sensitive question, do you think the general community there have the perception that COVID-19 is China virus? There are a lot of conspiracy theorists who think that the US government designed the virus and they released it in China, but for the most part everybody in the US knows that it came from China. A lot of people aren't actually blaming China. They know that it wasn't the Chinese government's fault. It wasn't your average Chinese citizen's fault that it happened. It was just something natural that happened. I've heard a lot of people talk about how unhygienic it is in China and how the wet markets are crowded with random exotic animals and people are consuming them and they're mixing their meats together, and this can cause cross-contamination of viruses and create super viruses. There are, of course, some people in the US that are racist against Chinese or Asians in general, so they're going to blame China anyway, but that's just a small population. So for the most part, everybody knows that it came from China, although I have heard stories here in the US where some people are boycotting like Asian markets that are owned by Asians or Chinese immigrants in the US, things like that. So Google Maps has asked, what's the condition of Ohio? My company headquarters is located in Akron, and I've been informed that they just start lockdown over there. So at the moment there's 18,027 cases in Ohio and 975 deaths. That's pretty bad. The state's been under a stay-at-home order, which is similar to the MCO in Malaysia, but there's been talk today actually on the news about them opening the state back up. Not all at once, but opening up certain businesses. They're developing their plan for it. It hasn't happened yet, but they're talking about it. So Azan has asked, at the beginning of the year, Malaysia had the 4th highest number of COVID cases. Today, Malaysia's dropped to number 37. On the other hand, COVID cases in the US has shot up from nowhere. What do you think are factors that contributed to those results? So when I arrived to Malaysia, the cases were growing pretty rapidly, and that's when the MCO began. the government brought the police and the military in, and they started enforcing people staying in their homes. At first they were giving out warnings, and then they were giving out fines, and then they increased the fines, and then now I've heard they're just arresting people, which they are enforcing. In the US, that didn't happen. Each state was acting independently. Each has their own laws and rules, and were taking their own steps. So a lot of states did take a lot of steps to prevent the spread of the virus, but they didn't do as much as Malaysia. They didn't totally lock everything down with a partial lockdown. You can still travel from state to state here in the US for the most part, so it's kind of hard to contain the virus here in the US. So Aramar wants to know, where is safer, US or Malaysia? That's probably the easiest question on this list to answer. My answer is going to have to be Malaysia for sure. I saw and experienced firsthand how they were handling the situation in Malaysia, and here in the US, well, there's not really a comparison really, because compared to Malaysia, they're not really doing much here. The way they're doing it in Malaysia wouldn't work here in the US, I don't think, because it's just such a big country. People would resist it. So while I was in Kuala Lumpur during the MCO, I definitely had less freedom than I'm used to, but I was fine with it. I felt completely safe. I wasn't worried about catching coronavirus, whereas here in the US, it's a bit of a gamble. You never know who's going to have it. Some people are wearing masks, some aren't, some are distancing, some aren't. So I live in a more rural area here in the US, so I'm not really afraid of it that much. But I definitely worry about it here in the US a lot more than I did in Kuala Lumpur. So that's it everybody for this video. If I didn't answer your question, please don't be offended. There will be a part 2 of this video. Perhaps I'll answer your question in there. But I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time.